Okay, so the goal of this video is to evaluate a PhD dissertation that I am going to present in one of our cognitive psychology meetings. And it's about the grammatical person in text and narrative. Just to put this a little more in context, the reason why our group is interested in this is to evaluate the role of first person narratives in how they can influence either physician or patient decisions in the context of advertisements, so web-based advertisements or TV advertisements, any type of advertisement. And so basically, this is a dissertation submitted by Tristan Thumpty in 2009. And I should say it's an absolutely outstanding PhD dissertation. I truly enjoyed reading this. Not only does a very good job in terms of the overview about the text. We have been looking for a long time for some kind of text that would give us an experimental point of view in terms of first-person narratives. Uh, but also the experiments are very bright. Now, I am not going to go over the content of the dissertation itself. You're more than welcome, and I actually highly encourage you to go over the content of this dissertation. But instead, what I am going to be focusing on is some basic concepts in terms of what I believe, and again, this is my interpretation only of what the main findings of this narrative have. So again, in my interpretation, the primary finding or the finding out of the different experiments in this dissertation are the following: that a first person narrative will put the reader, very important, take a perspective, uh, or I should say a spatial perspective, uh, from the perspective of the person, of the main character in the narrative. So again, and he, this dissertation it uses a number of different experiments, and even though I don't think this is the only explanation, he provides extensive evidence to demonstrate that this relationship does hold. So if I am reading something that has an I there, I am really embracing, that character in the narrative. However, if the narrative has a they, then I'm not going to be looking through the main character's eye, but I am going to be looking from somebody else's eye. Okay, so it's going to be coming from the outside. Now, what I would like to do here is not to challenge this main conclusion, because I think that it's at least the evidence that's presented here is correct. What I would like to do is to expand this a little bit and try to see this from a different perspective. So the way I tend to see this is that a first person narrative, it does not only provide, gives, raises the issue of what I would call a spatial schema. In other words, defining schema here, which is a number of different concepts that are all connected. If you're talking about a spatial schema, it means that if you imagine yourself in a given space, we naturally, that's something that humans do very naturally. we just start imagining ourselves in a space, and all of a sudden, we can connect all the different things that are in that space, and that creates a schema. Okay, so whenever you imagine yourself in a given space, all of a sudden, because we need to, on a day-to-day basis, we need to be oriented in space. We automatically connect those different objects. Actually, this is a very ancient technique from rhetoric. I believe, again, I don't know if it was exactly Aristotle, but several people in rhetoric um, use this memory device, which is if you're trying to remember a text that's long, you just associate different portions of the text with a given space, and then as you are delivering a speech with that text in mind, you just start walking through that space, and the content of the text will come to you. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that the spatial schema is so powerful that even to remember texts, this is very helpful. But again, back to this example here, my argument is that the spatial schema is only one out of many potential different schemata or schemas that you can connect a first-person narrative to. So basically, before getting to the spatial schema, you have schemas in general. Okay, and then in addition to the spatial schema, you can have other types of schema, such as, for example, emotional schema. Oops. Or you could have decision schema. And basically, several of these could be connected to this decision schema. So, for example, an emotional schema could be connected to a decision schema. For example, if there's one person that I don't like, my decision schema is whenever that person is involved, I'm going to be, well, I don't want to go in that direction because, the reality is that person brings me some unpleasant feeling. So, I dislike that person. So I'm just not going to go there. In terms of the spatial schema, well, if I find myself in a certain environment, in a dangerous environment, I'm going to be more defensive. I'm not going to be so take so many risks. If I am in a situation, a space where I feel completely safe, then I'm going to be more willing to take risks. Now, what's interesting in this is that by expanding the schema from this dissertation, from just talking in terms of just the spatial schema. And I should say, in the dissertation, the word schema is never used with the exception of one sentence where it's mixed with several other cognitive concepts. So for some reason, and maybe there is a reason, the concept of the spatial schema never really came up. But what's interesting, whenever you start, pointing to all of these different schemas, is that then all of a sudden you can combine two types of schema, which is the schema from the person who created the narrative, which, after all, when that person, the author, created the text, he or she was thinking, had a specific spatial scheme in mind. He or she had a specific emotional scheme in mind and a decision schema in mind. So basically what you have now here is a much, what I would say, much richer context because you are merging, you're blending, the schemas or the schemata from the person reading the text and the person who read the text. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because especially when you put things in the context of a decision schemata, things become much more interesting. So, and you can start explaining a wider range of phenomena, such as what is called in the literature the first person um, well, the first person narrative. So think about this for a second. Um, let's say, there are studies demonstrating this. So, for example, during the absolutely horrible genocide that happened in Rwanda, I believe that somewhere around 800,000 people were killed. This is probably one of the biggest tragedies in human history. It's absolutely impossible to describe the amount of suffering that went on with that genocide. Despite that, uh, people in the United States, took many years to even acknowledge the existence of the genocide. Now you could say, okay, so is this that people are they don't have an emotion or something? Well, not really. Studies have shown that whenever you describe something in a what I would call in a non-personal way, whenever you cannot impersonate the narrative, whenever you cannot have one single person being looking through the eyes of that person, basically, those kinds of emotions are very hard for people to relate to. However, think about, and there were multiple situations, unfortunate situations like this, where, for example, a little child uh, fell into a river or something, and then people were trying to rescue that child, and then the whole country just basically stops. Why? Is it because people care about more about the death of one child than 800,000 people like in the Rwanda genocide? No, not really. It's just that by focusing on one person, most people will basically take the perspective of the parent or of one of the parents of that child, and they will relate to that in a much it will be much easier for them to relate. Of course, that's not the only explanation for those facts. It also has to do with our ability to, big numbers of people. That's very difficult for us to relate to. So we can relate much better to individuals. Uh, but where I'm trying to get here is that in the case of the single child versus the 800,000 people, there's an emotional schema, and therefore there's a decision schema. So I'm going to take my time to think about the child versus, well, I'm going to be a little skeptical about a genocide with 800,000. If in that narrative, I could place myself in, with the images on TV, exactly where the accident with the child happened, then all of a sudden, I have a spatial schema. I can see where all the events are, and again, I can be impersonated. Whereas, most people have never been to Rwanda, and so it's really hard for them to get to, think about them in that specific scenario. So anyway, so this is what I would say is a little broader explanation about the dissertation that we just saw. Let me just emphasize that this dissertation is absolutely outstanding, and I would really recommend that if you have the time, you go over this text. It's definitely worth it. You are going to learn a lot.